Hello, welcome back. We are back again with I Mustache You Something. And this is entirely in honor of my good friend Andrew Ishak. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me. But you have a beard.
So we were just discussing this, and Andrew thought that I was bluffing when I said I'm going to shave this down to a mustache just to do this episode with Andrew.
I do not see the point. I mean, like I was saying, 7-Eleven was open from 7 to 11. They're now open 24 hours a day. They didn't change their name to 12-12, whatever that would be if they're open 24 hours a day. You can expand. You don't
Okay,
have
I
to
understand,
say,
but we have a extensive fan base. There are
uh,
literally at least six people waiting for another episode of this.
I agree, but you know how many of those are waiting for your mustache?
Zero.
None of them. They it's I'm not saying you can't have a mustache. I'm saying don't feel constricted by your past.
Yes, but part of the horror
Mhm.
and by extension the appeal is the cheesy part of the episode where there comes to be this like sort of focal point, like critical point, and
Uh-huh.
I lean into the camera and
Yeah.
I mustache you something, and if I can't
Huh?
then
Yeah.
the whole thing falls apart.
Okay, let me throw something else out there. You currently have a mustache. You
No,
know,
I have a
right?
beard.
No, you have a beard and a mustache. The mustache still exists.
Okay, this is your last chance to tell me what kind of mustache you want. Otherwise, I'm going to come back with the most horrific looking thing you've ever seen.
Okay, I want an upside down mustache.
No, there's no such thing as an upside down mustache. It's either I gave you the options. It's
Uh,
either the twirl that I had
uh,
before or
okay,
the handlebars.
let's go handlebar.
Got it. I'll be right back.
Wow.
Huh?
Wow. That's something.
Now I am ready to stash you something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Wow, you
can't.
you you did all that and that only took you 7.5 hours? That's incredible. You shaved all that off?
Yes, but I did
Amazing.
not belabor any of our six viewers
Yeah.
by
I
having to
appreciate that.
wait.
Hey, check this out. Check this out. Ready?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
So like
awesome.
I didn't have to do anything for that, but also
Huh.
it kind of reminds me of like 2020 too much. So I'm gonna take it off now.
Ah,
We're like doing all the Zoom gimmicks. So
I didn't know that was that's a game changer because my
yeah.
family is going to have to endure this for the
Uh-huh.
next week, and because I'm
Yeah.
off next week, so I
Yeah.
don't have to shave this for work.
Yeah.
And the reason I had the luxury during the initial mustache series was
Uh-huh.
we all wore masks
Yeah.
because usually it's just like that week of vacation that I get to have a
Right.
mustache and torture my family. And when the pandemic hit, I
Yeah.
told Mary, I said, you realize I'm going back, and she
Yeah.
said, yeah. I said, you know what that means? She goes, you're gonna have to shave the mustache.
Yeah.
I'm like, actually, no. She goes, why? I'm like, think about it. She goes, no, the masks. I'm like, the masks. That was
Why
the
would you
best
just
part of the
for the
pandemic
record,
for her.
why would you not have a mustache at work? Is it because people would think that something's wrong with you?
I mean, no. People would realize that there's something
Okay, okay,
wrong.
okay. Okay. Fair. All right.
like there's only so much I can hide it as
Yeah.
is. But if I show up like this, there's gonna be no doubt.
I don't know. It's fashion trends are, at the whim of the wind. You don't know what's going to happen. So I feel like it's back. I feel like you can kind of do anything now. You can kind of wear whatever you want now and do whatever you want.
So here's the thing. So I think we'll get into this when we talk
Mhm.
about your movie. So
Okay.
we're here primarily for you,
Thank you.
and you came out with. So is it a movie? Is it a show? Is it an episode? Like because I thought it was a movie, but it turned out to be episode one, so it's not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. It's exactly like The Godfather, basically. It's like no, I'm just kidding. It's a film project. So this is what I've created is the first episode. It's 65 minutes or so. I did write 5 parts. But I guess part of the reason I talk about it like a film or like a movie is because I think it kind of is more in that style. I mean, I'm not necessarily trying to do something here like super long term. It's like a mini series of sorts. And
Okay.
I think because we're showing it in theaters and because maybe it looks more like it's more film style rather than,
Okay.
TV show.
So don't
Uh,
be misled that it's episode one. It's like episode one of,
five or something.
yeah. So it's like maybe
Yeah.
Star Wars, maybe not Godfather,
Yeah.
because you don't want the third one to be terrible. Like you want
Right, right,
like
right. Yeah,
Star Wars.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's no prequel that will, have
You
like
don't, I don't know. We don't know what's gonna
really
where.
annoying. Dude, if you have Jar Jar Binks in like a prequel,
Could you imagine?
I mean, so on some level that would be epic. Like it would be like
Yeah,
tragic, but also like if
right.
your series is that successful that those 5 episodes,
Uh-huh.
are clamoring for a prequel,
Right,
and you could get Jar Jar Binks and the rights to
right.
Jar Jar Binks, that
We
would
just have
be.
Jar Jar Binks as like a church father or something like that. Like, wait, like that'd be.
I thought we were trying to avoid
I'm just saying
being
because he's got
heretical.
like a lot of wisdom. He's like he's like a sage character.
I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that I prep everyone in terms of like what the parameters are. Like
Yeah.
certain people that I interviewed in the past
Uh-huh.
required more prepping than
Uh-huh.
others. Like these words are off limits, for
Uh-huh.
example. And for the most part, they tended to fall within those parameters with,
Yeah.
some rare exceptions. But I think when you are doing a movie series, we'll call it,
Yeah.
on the church in general, and specifically about priests, and we're going to talk about that, you and I have to kind of prep and be like, okay, people are going to be looking for ways to be offended, right?
You're
Like
right.
they're going to be listening and be like, huh,
Yeah. You're right.
LOA,
But you said nothing about you didn't say Jar Jar Binks was off limits.
yeah.
Like you didn't that didn't come up at all. I'm following your directions, but you didn't say anything about me talking about the wisdom of Jar Jar Binks.
My mom used to say that about me as a kid, where
Yeah.
if something was a rule, I
Uh-huh.
would follow the rule for the most part. Like I
Yeah.
was pretty good about following rules.
Yeah.
But until it was made a rule, like it's all fair game. Like
I agree.
you didn't say that I couldn't ride down the hill full speed on a
Yeah.
bike with no brakes. You never
Right.
said those specific words to me.
Yeah.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, and I was never
Yeah.
told don't do that.
Yeah. Okay, well that's fair. I should be a little more I should think a little more and recognize from what you said that I shouldn't have talked about Jar Jar Binks. I get it. You're
Jar Jar Binks,
anti
yes. Jar
yeah.
Jar Binks as a church father.
What? Yeah. Okay. So I think anybody who's going to listen to this, if they're looking to be offended, I mean, you can find anything to be offended about. I'll tell you. For example, I made
Actually, you
something.
know what I'm gonna get a comment about? Is like,
Huh?
why isn't this a Coptic icon?
Yeah,
Why do
seriously.
you
What's this
have this?
Western stuff?
What?
What's this Western stuff you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
behind?
exactly. It's like, why do you have this heretical icon? It's actually not heretical. Like,
Yeah,
same guy,
right.
same people, same event. Just
I don't know. I don't know. I've looked at a lot of Coptic icons, and I'm pretty sure Jesus never turned his head. I'm pretty sure he only looked straight forward. Because I've looked at a lot of Coptic icons. He's not looking to the side.
No, actually, this is actually a gift from a good friend of ours.
Okay.
This is like a limited edition lithograph, like one of those like
Yeah.
printed things. So they only print so many of them before the plate runs out.
Yeah.
So he was my friend Joel. So in case
Yeah.
Joel makes it into the 13th minute of
Yeah.
this recording, which he won't, he'll get the shout out.
Well, I love it. I think it's great. And as I was saying, I could make something like what you have behind you, something that is like a representation, like a reality, and people will find something to be offended by, even if there's really nothing offensive in it. So even like that thing behind you, it's not offensive whatsoever. I guarantee you, I know that there are a lot of people who would say like, why do you have that in your house? It's not Coptic. So, you know, people will find things to be offended by. You know.
What responsibility do we have? And I think the two extremes are, I have no responsibility, where I can say whatever I want and it's everybody else's problem.
Yeah.
And the other extreme is well, no, I have to walk on eggshells and like,
Yeah,
oh, you're right. Like maybe somebody, let me change that. I think I have a Coptic icon somewhere. Let me go find that and I'll hang that. Like, how do you find that middle? And it's a range, and for different
yeah,
people, it's going to be, different set points. But how do you find that range where you're like just careful enough and respectful enough, but not overdoing it?
yeah. Let me answer your question by not answering it whatsoever and going, going a different direction. No, no, I mean, kind of answering it. Um, th- I think that this is one of the challenges of being a Coptic American. We generally have like two lives. I know it's not exactly like that, but the way that you would talk with people at work is not the way you're going to talk with your church friends, or not the way you would talk in church. The topics of conversation are often different. And so the idea is like we want to align ourselves, right? We want to have the same kind of personality or identity. I mean, it's normal to self-present in different ways to different people. We do all the time, like, to your grandmother versus, to your kids. But I think this is part of the challenge is that we do want kind of go, oh, what will people be offended by? I want to make sure that this other person I go to church with doesn't hear about this one. Well, that's part of the problem is that we're living our lives, yet we're trying to keep our lives hidden from church because it's not churchy enough or not orthodox enough or not Coptic enough. And I don't know. That to me is like a really frustrating game to play.
I have the opposite problem where I am reminded constantly by people that I'm allowed to be myself, but
Uh,
just not all at once. I have
Part
to
of it.
I have to sort of like phase people in.
Yeah, yeah,
And the best example of that is when I have like a high school student or a college student from church following me around at work, and
yeah,
they think like there's no way he's this much of an idiot at work. And they're usually in clinic with me for about 30 minutes or so before they get that look on their face where they're like, and I can see it, like I can read it in their reaction. And as
yeah,
soon as we're done, we walk out, I go, you thought I was going to be different, didn't you? And they're like, well, I'm exactly the same, huh? And they're
yeah,
like, yeah, 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 yeah. It's remarkable. Like they can't process how this can be like a working professional. And that's why the mustache,
yeah,
is probably going to set it over the edge where I
yeah,
only have so much like credibility, right? Like people walk in, they see my name on the door, and like it's staff, and they bring you back, and oh, you're going to be seeing Dr. Messiah today, and like have a seat, and they do all the professional things, and at first blush, there's really no indication that they're seeing a crazy person, right? They think, okay, like he's got a shirt, he's got a tie,
yeah,
he's. If I walk in like this with like a Captain America T-shirt and my jeans, I've already used up all of my social currency. Like I've already
yeah,
burned it all to the ground, and I'm fighting back from that hit of
yeah,
how I walked in and how unprofessional I look. But if I walk in clean shaven or like a professional beard, shirt, tie, whatever, then slowly but surely the charade starts to unravel.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
his socks don't match. Like,
yeah,
are those Swedish fish on his socks? Like, And like they start noticing these things throughout the visit. And by the end, they're like, okay, like I understand that he's quirky, but he's also retained enough of his credibility that I'm gonna actually follow through with my treatment plan. And ultimately it's not about me, it's about them. Like if
yeah,
I have a treatment plan for them and they don't trust me,
yeah.
then they're not gonna follow it. So
Right.
yes, there is a balance there.
Well, yeah. I mean, you mentioned that you're able to kind of be yourself a little easier. I think that's a good state to reach to have that ability to think. I mean, I try to do it, and I try to be myself more at church, and I try to. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I try to approach things in a way that's like just be who I am, in more places. I think it's tough to do.
Is
I
is that a limitation of you? Is that a limitation of your environment, or is it a combination of the two?
I mean, naturally, uh, in church we are supposed to be more reverent, and I would say I'm not always reverent of things in general, and so for me, sometimes I kind of pull back on how I might act. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I do think in church we should be more reverent than we would be if we were watching like a game on TV with our friends. So it's not all bad. It's just, yeah, a little bit of it is me not necessarily wanting to present myself in a way that would be like, oh, that's not appropriate for a church group, even though it's nothing wrong. It's just different.
So, what is a situation outside of church that you would think that is not being irreverent to a fault, where,
Yeah,
I think you can walk in anywhere and
yeah,
make a scene, right? Like like you can go into Walmart, for example, and
sure.
Walmart's not really a place where it's like,
Yeah,
oh, walk quietly, like, be humble or whatever. Like, you can do whatever you want at Walmart. Like,
right.
that's evidenced by many,
Well,
many memes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right?
I'll give you an example. I mean, in terms of like what people talk about in terms of their preferences. So, for
Yeah.
example, all the music that I like. I talk with my friends, my church friends about music all the time, but I know that there are a lot of people who are careful to talk about their media preferences because it might show them to be, or like political views. Sometimes might show them to be like not Coptic enough. I do feel like that's often the case. So if I were to say, for example, I don't really like Coptic music very much, does that make like bringing up that kind of topic? I think is challenging for a lot of people at church, like to
But does
talk.
that make you irreverent? I don't think that makes you
No,
irreverent.
that's not irreverent. That's not an example of
So
irreverence.
that's why I'm pushing back, because I do agree that as the guy who really, like, to an extreme, is very irreverent. Like,
Yeah.
I I still can't believe in my 20s we were doing bowling one time, and we had these like bonus blue and red pins, and one of the bonus pins got stuck in the machine, and I said, well, we can't get the bonus if the pin's stuck. Two options: one, alert the staff; two, climb into the machine.
Which one did you do?
Option two. So
Yeah.
I didn't walk it through that
Yeah.
maybe climbing into the machine would trigger
Yeah.
the ball sensor mechanism, and the gate would close on me, and like that was not
Well,
something
I
I
think
thought
it's
of.
fine. I mean, as long as you didn't bring up Jar Jar Binks, I think it's fine.
And being that Jar Jar Binks is a church father that, is on the left, we said we weren't going to say that, but the mental processing and the sense of decorum just wasn't there, right? Like, it was a bad decision. It wasn't following the rules, and this is, maybe not the place where it's known for its reverence, but
Yeah.
clearly that is an irreverent act. Like, I'm crossing
Yeah.
some boundaries there.
Yeah.
So at baseline, I'm very irreverent, but when I walk into church, being in awe and recognizing the holiness of that place. And I think that we do a great job of that as a community, like things
Yeah.
like taking off your shoes.
Yeah.
Not I don't know if any other church takes off their shoes going into the altar. And
Yeah.
for me, there was a point in my life where, like, I don't get why we do this. Nobody else does this. Everybody
Yeah.
else doesn't care. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, no, that's a very special thing. Like, for us, we're always physically reminding ourselves and each other, this is a holy place. Take your shoes off.
Right. And I appreciate that. I think that this is where I definitely feel that we need to be reverent at church. I mean, it's important to do. I guess I'm thinking about like I'm thinking about relationships in general. Like the way we might talk with other people outside of church, but still in the church community. But certainly the reverence is necessary in church. I mean, that's an
And
important.
that's why I'm pushing back, because I think, like, I mean, I've known you for a long time. You had Out of Egypt. What year was that?
Yeah, that was. I mean, I met you in 2010. Yeah.
2010. And I've known your brother Eddie since like 1995 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Right. So I've known Eddie for a long time. I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you or he really ever being irreverent in church. But
Yeah.
if we've equated, oh, I have, to be reverent with I have to put on this pious face of I only
Yeah,
listen to Tisbeha in the
yeah,
car.
yeah,
And, God forbid that if I have family movie night and we watch a Pixar movie instead of a
yeah.
Saints movie, then no, like, like
But
my
you don't think
kids and
people
I,
feel that pressure? You don't think people feel some of that pressure sometimes? I do.
I think we do, but like, I think we have a responsibility to ourselves and to each other to kind of shrug it off. And if that means that we're going to be judged, then so be it. I mean, how often are people judged for doing the right thing? Like all
Yeah.
the time.
Right. And I think this is you and I maybe have gotten to the point where we feel like, yeah, I can kind of be myself at some
Yeah.
point. But I think it's tough. I think it really is challenging. I mean, think about the way that people feel. Maybe you had a situation when you were younger where you're out with like your non-church friends and you see your church friends or vice versa.
Yeah.
A little bit jarring. You're like, oh, how do I act? I'm gonna have to figure out how to act between these two different groups.
Worlds colliding, worlds
Yeah,
colliding.
exactly. Yeah. And so a little bit of that is, that's natural, but a little bit of that also is on like giving people the space within a church group to like to be themselves, even if it's not exactly what we expect as like a perfect cut.
And that's a great segue to one of the key topics that we wanted to discuss, which is like, what is the purpose of a church group? What is the purpose of a church community?
Yeah.
If the purpose of that church community is this sort of social programming of, well, these are the criteria, and we want you to comply with these criteria, and well, I don't know if we like handlebar mustaches in our community.
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely
I,
be communicating.
I don't think, at least I don't think that's the point of our community, but I don't think that that's a foreign concept. I think we,
Well, yeah, it's not the point of the community, but sometimes it's like speeding, for example. There are more speeding tickets than reckless driving tickets. And the reason is because speeding, you can say, oh, you're going 75 miles an hour. So you're speeding, there's a quantitative measure of your rule breaking. Whereas reckless driving is much more hard to gauge, like
hmm,
what's driving, what's not. And so I think a lot of times in our church, what we do is we don't really focus on not I shouldn't say we, I'm saying it happens sometimes that our focus is on the social aspects because it's much more manageable to say, here are the things you should be doing and shouldn't be doing from a social aspect, rather than like, what are we doing that's following the teachings of Jesus Christ? So, in my opinion, this is how I feel. Generally, I hear a lot more about the social aspect than the teachings of Jesus Christ. I hear a lot about these are the kind of things
hmm,
you should be doing and how you should present yourself, and here are the things you should believe are right and wrong that like are like interpretations of things rather than what did Jesus teach us, because that's a much more, it's not more complicated, but it's there's much more depth to it. So it's harder to access, I think, sometimes, rather than saying, well, I'm not going to listen to this, or I would eat this during the fast. And I love fasting, by the way. I mean, I'm not disparaging fasting. I love it. It's one of my favorite aspects of the church. But part of it is like that's a means to an end. That's not the end itself.
hmm, hmm. And you think it's a shortcut that people take, particularly if they're in a position of leadership where, I don't really know how to guide people to be like Christ or measure to the extent of which they resemble Christ. So it's much easier. It's, you know, almost like a proxy measure.
Yeah,
The
it's a pro.
sort of
Yeah,
like how much do we conform to being Coptic, right? We're not
right.
conforming to Christ. We're conforming to this ideal of being Coptic.
Well, if you're a parent and you want to put your kid on the right path, you say things like, "Don't hang out with these bad people. Don't drink. Make sure to be at church for this event. Make sure that you are you can find these rules as opposed to saying, hey, in general, I want you to follow these principles.
Yeah.
And I mean, how do you measure that? Right. So that's the harder thing. Like, how do I measure if my child is loving towards others? There's ways to do it, but we often use proxies of things like say thank you, say please, right? Tell Giddo you love him, right? Like we use those kind of proxies because it's much easier to see and measure.
Hmm.
So it's not unnatural. I mean, it's a normal thing. We do it all the time with Like, how do I show my wife I love her? Well, I could open up my heart figuratively, or I can like give her a gift to say,
Yeah.
well,
Open up your pocketbook
yeah,
practically.
right, right,
Okay. So how do we do both? Because I don't think that either one of us is saying, "Oh, forget, the
yeah.
social metrics and forget like the details," um, at the expense of the ideals and the principles. But how do we, first of all, how do we make sure that these discrete metrics are aligned with our overarching values? And how do we make sure that we're paying attention to both, not one or the other?
I mean, it's a good question that I don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
I think it's
There's a reason that wasn't the "I mustache you something," because usually "I mustache you something" is something that you can answer. And I think you're right. I think that is an unanswerable question.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's totally. I do it with my kids all the time. I'm not. This is not a criticism of anybody or any sort of style. I definitely with my kids will say, "Well, I hope this is happening because that's a sign to me, a proxy that they are of their character, right?"
Right.
So I'm glad that my son is very polite because it's a proxy of something else, right? Being
Right.
the polite is not the thing we want. It's the something underneath about his spirit.
And the
Um,
converse is true. And like even for myself, I just had this conversation with my 15-year-old son that I felt short of my expectations for myself and the expectations that I think he should hold me to as a father. And by falling short of those expectations, it's an opportunity for me to apologize and say, this was not my best moment.
yeah,
I'm sorry that I behaved this way. And I'm glad that this is another opportunity for you to get the message that the values and the principles are clear. The behaviors that reflect those values and principles are also clear. Let's be clear that I still ascribe to these values and these
yeah,
principles, even
yeah,
though my behavior did not.
yeah, yeah, right.
And I think the overarching message that I want all of my kids to take away is not, oh, my dad's perfect and he does everything right. It's my dad understands the difference between right and wrong
Yeah,
and is willing to be clarified on
yeah,
what the right thing is to do.
right.
And when he's the one that's making the mistake, and when he's the first one to say, "Yep, I fell short of this standard." It's not about being perfect. It's about
Right.
understanding what imperfection looks like and working towards perfection.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Okay. How does Obuna, how does your movie series help us to see that more clearly?
Well, um, the series and this first episode, which is I'm showing in a couple different places and it'll be available in May online. I think when people watch it, I think they're going to see a reflection of their community. It may not be exactly what their community is like, but they'll see some reflections and they will see exactly what you're describing. It's people who are trying to do the right thing, but don't always do the right thing. And it happens in lots of different ways. So, for example, the main character, he is a new priest, somebody who's been a priest for about a month. And what a lot of priests have told me, because I spent a lot of time interviewing and researching before I did this, I want it to be based in reality. Priests told me they often didn't know what to do early on. In fact, they still sometimes don't know what to do. But it took him, some priests would say it took me years to figure out how to pray the liturgy the way that the way that I felt was appropriate, or to how to resolve disputes. So some people sometimes just don't know what to do because they don't have enough experience. And so they keep trying, kind of like we as fathers try to do our best, but we don't always do the thing we want to do. Abunas are fathers as well, and they try to do the best thing, but sometimes they don't know what to do, right? And I've had experiences like that too. There are other characters who do they don't know what the right thing to do is because, or they don't do the right thing because they have, things that they're holding inside that have frustrated them in the past, and so they might do something differently, or they might want to subscribe to a particular identity that doesn't align with doing the right thing, but there's a lot of different reasons we may not do exactly what we want to do, but it's this idea of like striving towards what's right at all times. And I think
Hmm.
you'll see that in a lot of the characters. And I've been told that people feel like some of the characters reflect who they are.
Hmm.
How do you feel?
No, I'm thinking about the different characters, and you're right. Like I think the first time I watched it, I was focusing more on the priest, but when you're mentioning the other characters and their struggles also, I'm thinking about the like that board meeting, like the Legna meeting,
Yeah,
and the different personalities that were there. And yes, these are the archetypal, uncles, Arakma, like, these are the big shots of the church. And you're right. I think I have to watch it again and pay attention this time, not so much to the priest and his struggles, but everybody around him and their struggles.
yeah,
And you kind of take it for granted that the priest is going to get pulled into 18 different
yeah,
directions, right? Like the classic thing that kept coming up. It's like
yeah, yeah,
more Coptic, more English,
yeah,
more Coptic, more
yeah,
Arabic,
yeah,
like a mix of all three, but maybe just one, but maybe the other one. And it's like,
yeah,
okay, like of course the priest is going to get pulled into all these different directions, but
yeah,
I didn't really tune myself into, and I hope that the next time I see it, I'm paying more attention to that, because I think that observation is iconic of our entire community, right? Where
yeah,
it's not the priest that is pulled in different directions. We're
yeah,
all pulled in different directions, and we all have these complex feelings and complex experiences that push us to
yeah.
think one way or another.
Right. Well, there are two young ladies in a couple of the scenes who they meet each other, and they're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their dedication, how their identity is dedicated to church. And
Hmm.
so one character who's really frustrated that somebody else is coming in and might kind of dilute what she thinks is the right thing to do, and what it means to be like a good Coptic person. And then we have somebody else coming from the outside who is a little bit dismissive of like a pious kind of identity. And so for them to kind of find their middle ground and to be able to say, that different identities can exist and can still be friends with each other. You don't have to necessarily all be exactly like each other to be friends. And even when somebody comes from the outside the church and they're not particularly dedicated, well, that's something we should be even working harder to bring into the church. And so, I mean, I tried to write it in that way so that people kind of saw that it's not just one kind of character. It's not just, and I'm gonna, being a little bit unfair here, but in a lot of the stuff that we are asked to produce, oftentimes for church, it's I'm now drunk and using drugs. What will I do? And then somebody comes and says, you should go to church. Okay, I'm gonna go to church now and I fix my problem. And so we have these characters where it's like the super pious character and the prodigal son, right? It's a very, very common thing we often do in church plays and stuff like that. I don't think doesn't reflect how everybody's experiences. Our experiences are much more messy. That sometimes we're a part of the church and we're like, we're not the prodigal son or prodigal daughter. We're part of the church, but we often feel disconnected to the church. And then other people who are not, like, they might present themselves as like, I love the church and I love everything in it, but it's not necessarily coming from a place of spirituality, but coming from a place of rule following. And so the characters are much more, I think, realistic, much more complex as we are in real life.
I would say that after laying the logs and arranging them and putting the kindling underneath, the newspaper is ready to be lit. And this is the point of the episode where I mustache you something. What do you hope people take away from watching Abuna?
Ooh, a complex question. I My party line, the way I'll tell people is this is art, this is entertainment, it's research, again, I interviewed a lot of priests and their wives, and I'm a researcher at Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit school in Northern California. So to me, this is how I present my research. I did research on priests and their lives and on the Coptic Church, and I'm presenting that, and you can take away whatever you want to take away from it. However, I do have, I mean, are you excited about this? I I would like people to think a little bit more about the way that our culture affects our how we do everything, the structure of our church, the spirituality. I mean, I'm in no way saying we got to change this or that. I don't know. I don't know what it is we're supposed to do differently. I just know that it's good for us. It's good for any organization to continually want to improve the self, right? We want to get better and better. There are aspects of our organization, nobody will doubt this. There are aspects of the Coptic community that are not ideal for for not aligned with what we would think is like bringing as many people to the teachings of Jesus Christ as possible. And so,
or even just retaining the ones that we have.
right,
Like forget
yeah,
like outreach and
right,
mission. Like no, no, no,
right,
no, no. Let's make the mission and the people that we're outreaching to the 10th graders. Why?
right,
Because they're getting their driver's license, and as soon as they get their driver's license, they're either in there or they're out. Like they're
yeah,
no longer these hostages of their
yeah,
parents, right? We don't, they're no longer a captive audience,
right,
and that drop off in retention that we get in just 1 year is a huge
yeah,
opportunity gap.
yeah,
This retention of just who we have. Forget
right,
bringing in just these
yeah,
people that are here, and the second they have the freedom to go elsewhere, they're like, yeah, this is
yeah,
not that
yeah,
official.
yeah. And I think that is an important aspect of, I would say, like a new school way of thinking about our role in the Coptic Church. That, yeah, we can sit here and say we got to change this. It's not we got to change the dogma. It's not we have to change
No,
the
if anything, we have to go back to
right,
our roots and our essence and who we are as a faith.
right. And we know that there's been like a calcification around it, right? There's been other things that get attached to it, and then like that's what we see, and it becomes hardened. And okay, so now this is the Coptic Church, and we know that that's not true. The kernel is in there,
Right.
but we have all these things around it that we kind of go, well, that's the Coptic Church. It's not. It's not. In fact, I'm going to say, I mean, whatever. Okay, is this not theological or dogmatic? Language has nothing to do with the Coptic Church. I understand the
Right.
importance of Coptic and importance of keeping that tradition alive and a language that people died for. I understand that. But I mean, people will say things like, "Oh, Coptic. Oh, yeah, it's like being in heaven when we go to the Coptic liturgy." No, it's not, because they're not speaking Coptic in heaven. Okay, you think because he's a baby when he was in Egypt, he like pick up. No, he was speaking Aramaic. So should we do everything in Aramaic? Is that what the Coptic Church would say? No. So we know like there's these things around it, like language and culture, that sometimes keep us from seeing like the real essence. And an example of that, again, in language is if somebody talks to me in a language I don't understand, I don't get to that essence. I don't get to that kernel. And
Yeah.
so we know these things get in the way, and it's important for us in this kind of new style of thinking about the church that, yeah, we should figure out what this thing is, not the thing around it, not the identity that we wrap
Right.
it in.
And sometimes it is intertwined with language.
Yeah.
And the example I like to give people is the first hymn that we say in the liturgy of the word, which in the annual like normal season is going to be Taishori. And in the Lenten season is Tishori. And I mean I love Coptic hymns as much as the next guy. And there are hymns that I believe to a certain extent lose their hymnology and they lose their texture when you translate them. And Taishori is one of them. Like Taishori is a beautiful hymn, and when you put it in English, you're like, it's a little tough to follow. It's a little tough to sing. Tishori, on the other hand, is actually, in my opinion, better in English.
Yeah.
And like it has the same cadence, it has the same flow, it has the same melody, it has the same high points, it has the same low point. Like everything flows better, and you actually understand it. And obviously, that's interpretation. That's an opinion, right? There's nothing objective about anything that I just said. But I think somebody who appreciates worship and appreciates the spirituality, the melismatic, the uh, participation, and all of those individual elements that go into worship, I think I think I'd get a significant proportion of people agreeing with me that yeah, I think we should be saying Taishori in Coptic and Tishori in English. But the metrics are not these absolutist like language driven metrics, but things that are how do we get more people to participate? How do we get more people to understand? How do we preserve, like as you said, this, right? Like whatever is inside this spiritual vehicle that the church is trying to deliver to us. How do we preserve that as best as possible?
Yeah. And so this film project is showing that there is an outside. There is a case to it. There are things around it,
Yeah.
and we have to just consider that. Again, I'm not touching the kernel. I don't know anything about. I don't know. I don't know very little about theology and dogma. It's not my place either to say, hey, here's how it should be different. I don't feel that way, nor would I know where to start on that. So
Right.
I'm talking about the culture and just to look at it and say, like, okay, so like, what is it? Do we have a complete picture of what our culture is?
Right.
And we trick ourselves sometimes, right? I mean, well, okay, like we don't like we kind of gloss over the fact that the role of women in the church. Like we gloss over it all the time. We kind of act like, well, women have, there's writings online you'll see in different dioceses. They'll say things like, well, actually, it's actually a blessing to be silent in the church. And it's like, well, okay, we're glossing over what a Coptic woman's experience is by telling them that, like, no, it's actually there's nothing to think about here. And I think it's good for us to think about it. Good for us to talk about it and compare it to, like, what is that essence we're trying to get to.
I mean, I did a previous mustache episode on the role of women in the church,
Yeah.
and I think one of the things, it was a while ago. I mean, like I said, I'm resurrecting this
Yeah.
series just for you and to help
Wow.
bring people to watch Abuna. But even though it was a while ago, I'm pretty sure I brought up even then the observation that I don't think anybody's saying that women are going to be priests or serve in the altar, but there's a huge gap between where we are and where we could be
Yeah.
in terms of encouraging and promoting participation of women.
Yeah.
So let's put the altar as off limits. No priests, no you know
Yeah.
serving in the altar. But why can't they sing in the chorus? Like
Yeah.
that's the role of the chanters. The
Right.
chanters sing and they serve outside.
Right.
We've muddled both. We've muddled that the boys as chanters are allowed to serve in the altar, which they shouldn't, and that the girls who should be encouraged and not just allowed to sing should be encouraged to sing. Like, why couldn't they stand up there with them?
Yeah.
Same with the readings. The readings are the equivalent of Sunday school.
Yeah.
So if we're really going to be honest with ourselves, we have to do one of two things. Say they're not allowed to teach Sunday school,
Right.
which I wouldn't support, but at least I would understand because it would be congruent with the
Yeah.
decision to say that they can't read the Pauline epistle.
Yeah.
So like and again, I'm not trying to like cause trouble or say like, oh, we need
There you are.
women in the chorus and we need women reading the Pauline epistle, and I'm gonna no,
Yeah.
this is not an activist kind of thing. It's just a
Yeah.
simple observation that we're kind of falling short of what our stated goals are, which is to encourage everyone to participate fully
Yeah.
within the confines of what their appropriate roles are. So if the women's role is not in the altar, fine. Then how do we have them fully participate outside the altar?
Yeah. Oh, I think this conversation is a good example of things we should be talking about more, and we should be a little more open about it. And I feel like we're tiptoeing around some things we actually feel, in part because it's, almost like if you were to call for something, yeah, women should be able to read the Pauline epistle, then that's considered, again, like against the theology of the dogma of the church, which
It's not.
it's not. But I will tell you that on some dioceses' websites, they use scripture to justify it. And
Which again, I like I don't think you and I are gonna die on that hill of like, I'm not coming back to church until my wife is allowed to read the Pauline epistle.
yeah,
Like that's not the goal.
yeah,
But I think the point that you just made, I think, is a central point. And I think this was what I was hoping to get at in having this conversation with you, and hoping that more people, whether they watch this or not, will watch your movie, and whether or not they watch your movie are prompted to start talking about it and start asking these questions. Make a deliberate decision and
yeah,
say, this would be a bad decision to let women read the Pauline epistle because,
yeah,
and don't give me like this sort of trite, like proof texting,
Yeah.
like do a proper biblical exegesis, right?
Yeah.
Do a proper study and what was St. Paul saying and what did he mean and who is he speaking to and what is the historical context for this and how does it align with the writings of the church fathers and what did they do in the first century? And we've accomplished this and said that we feel strongly that they shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
But upon further review, singing in the chorus seems to be okay, and we don't see what the big deal is. So we're going to put as much effort into promoting women singing in the choruses as we do blocking them from the readings. Right? Let's do the actual study.
Right. And then figure out what you actually think is right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then act
Yeah.
on it. Don't just say, well, we feel pretty strongly against the readings, and I guess we're fine with the chorus. No, no, like feel strongly about both. And
Yeah.
if anything, err on the side of charity, err on the side of being more inclusive, err on the side of being more supportive
Yeah.
of whoever needs to be supported.
Yeah. Yeah. I can certainly tell you that this is one of those topics where we said earlier, how do people like present themselves at church versus other places? There are a lot of people, and I'm going to use a word that a lot of people are going to hate, a lot of people who are feminists in our church. And just to be clear what a feminist is somebody who believes women should be equal to men in terms of their rights. I'm not talking about church stuff. I'm talking about in society. Okay. That's like people don't believe that. They believe feminists want to do something like destroy some sort of like, they want to destroy. That's not how feminists feel, right? I'm a feminist because I believe women should have equal rights to men. Again, we're saying outside of the church, we're talking about society. Um, I think that's something people don't want to talk about. You want people talk openly about that. Carol Marcos, she's a master's student in a school in Ottawa, Carleton University. She just published her thesis. It's so good. If you are interested in this topic, you should go read it. She talked about the way, I mean, it's a lot about Coptic identity. She didn't want to talk about the role of women originally, and then because after talking to so many women, she found that gender was inextricable from Coptic identity. You have to talk about gender if you're going to talk about it. And the work that she did, I think, is really interesting because she's a good researcher and showing like this is how it is in our church. So what are our thoughts on this now that this is how it is? I appreciate that kind of honesty.
Right. And I don't want everyone just to agree with me for the sake of agreeing with me,
Yeah,
but have a disagreement that's rooted
yeah,
in some kind of logic,
yeah,
some kind of foundation from the church, uh, proper biblical study, and I always know when to start nodding and smiling in a conversation when I hear that, well, this is the way we've always done it.
yeah, yeah.
Ah,
Yeah, I got you, I got you.
okay. Yeah,
Right.
I'm
As
sorry.
you as
I
you put
thought
leeches on your arms, and
like, I was like, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought we were discussing something. I'm getting beat over the head. Okay.
yeah.
No, I'll just smile and take it. Thank you very much.
Well, that's why I love talking with you, Mina. I feel like conversations always go in different directions.
And I was afraid that you would follow your party line of um, it's art. Okay, but why did you make this art? For people
Uh-huh.
to see it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but what do you want people to take away? Whatever they want. Uh, okay, but you have to have some parameters
Uh-huh.
of what you put all the like clearly it's a lot of work and editing and
Yeah.
interviewing and writing and time and like at the end for you just to be like, oh, do whatever you want. No.
Well, I mean, it's not okay. Like, it's not like this is not an experimental film where somebody would watch and be like, well, "What did I just watch? What is this even
Right.
about?" I mean, I think you'd watch it and be like, "Oh yeah, I get it. I get what this is about." And to a degree, I mean, I've had people certainly at the Q&As in different places. I hear people's different interpretations of it, and they vary. But there's no interpretation that's like, oh, yeah, you're saying we should merge with the Shias, right? Like it's not like something crazy like that, or like
Right.
somebody saying like, oh, I love that you made this movie because now we should all the priest is the authority. We should always nobody's taking kind of extreme views of it because it's not extreme. It's a
No.
very extreme
Right.
project.
Right.
Um, which is what makes it kind of funny sometimes when I do have challenges where it's kind of looked at as extreme in a way when it's
And if somebody wants to interpret something that's not extreme as extreme, then that
yeah,
says more about the viewer than it does about
yeah.
what they're viewing.
Well, can I give you an example?
Sure.
Somebody said we had a showing on Saturday. They said, "Okay, now that you've exposed all these issues, could you talk about the treasures of the church?" And I'm like, I didn't expose. I exposed the fact that we have questions about language use. I exposed that. Like you were all walking around going like, "What? We don't know what language we what?" No, I didn't expose. I didn't. There's nothing. No exposure at
Right.
all. It's
And
simply a
and and the character who played the catty, judgmental girl, I that was one of my, like, you brought her up. It was one of my favorite characters. It's like, oh yeah, we have no idea where you got that. Like,
yeah,
completely made that up.
yes, exactly. And so like I'm not yeah, it's there's things we do that happen in our church and but people want sometimes want to look at if they I think I here's what I think it is. We all I should say we all, I should say we love the church and many people love the church. And because of that, a lot of the media around the church is praise of not just the church as a religion and not just a church as like the synod or the people, but also the church as like a physical place. Like we kind of we start to talk about these aspects that are not theological as like again things that we love um all the time. And so to say like, oh yeah, I love it, but also like, hey, here's like some things we could talk about. I think that's a hard thing for some people to hear.
And just like our human person is body, soul, and spirit, and not just spirit and not just body, but a unity of those elements, our church is also a
Yeah,
physical place, a physical entity, a
right.
social experience, and a spiritual life with
Right,
God. It is all three. And to
right.
neglect one over the other is betraying the unity of those three parts of our physical church community.
Yeah. Hey, a related question. Is it acceptable to criticize an icon?
What you mean, like
To critique, like, I don't like the way it looks
I don't
in
know.
the church.
I can tell you that at baseline, as I am irreverent with many
Huh?
things, I'm also like very critical. Like I could make something and paint something and be like, I don't like this or I don't like that. I think at baseline, I would have the tendency to do that. I'm getting too old for that sort of thing, and I'm
Oh, yeah,
getting
yeah.
too tired to like criticize anything anymore.
Oh,
And
yeah. Sure.
I can literally hear or see almost anything now and just go, hmm,
Fine. Yeah.
okay,
I,
and just move on. So I don't know to what point it would rise for me to be for it to be worth criticizing, but
I ask because I think it's like, what is the delineation between the church with a capital C and the church elements?
yeah,
Like, it's kind of tough to figure out sometimes, like, what is it? You know?
yeah. I think we know it when we see it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been serving Sunday school for more than 25 years. Many different churches, many different priests, many different ages. And there's relationships that we have with our Sunday school kids, and we know the difference between the kid that's acting out because he's having a tough time and the
Yeah.
kid that's acting out because he's trying to genuinely get under your skin.
Yeah.
Those are two different kids.
Yeah.
And I think we might choose to handle both of them the same,
Yeah.
or handle them differently. But I think that um, if we handle them the same, there's a missed opportunity with both.
Yeah.
With the kid that really is just having a tough time and struggling, that kid needs extra love and like a check-in or a phone call or like, hey, what's going on? Or maybe like if you know that somebody else, like whether it's a friend or another servant or somebody from their family that like is close to them, like, hey, listen, like what's going on with so and so? Like he doesn't seem himself, or she seemed a little bit irritable in class today. What's going on? And then the kid that is actually trying to get under your skin, that's an opportunity to do something very different than the other kid. Like that's an opportunity to sit down and be like, what's going on? Like what goal are you accomplishing by being disruptive in class? Like Like if you want to get under my skin, you're going to eventually do it. Like you didn't do it today, even though you really tried your best. But what are
Yeah.
you accomplishing here? And the behavior on the outside might be exactly the same, but understanding that relationship and the fundamental
Yeah.
underpinning of why they're behaving that way dictates the response.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it depends on what the
What the
underlying reason is, not just what the superficial thing is. Like if
yeah.
I'm just criticizing the icon because I'm just walking around and like I hate this and I hate that, then someone should come up to me and be like, why are you so negative? Why are you so grumpy? Like,
Right.
oh, because I can't keep my mustache. I love my mustache and I'm going to have to shave it and I'm very sad. Okay, then you don't need to be a crabby uh, grumpy uncle just because
Yeah.
you're allowed to have a mustache. Like, let's talk about your feelings. So I think really checking in with people and figuring out why they're saying what they're saying matters more than whether it's okay. Like, and that goes back to your point earlier about are we just looking for social programming? This is what you're allowed to do. This is what you're not allowed to do. And are we checking boxes, or are we being curious about what's motivating that kind of behavior? Right?
Yeah.
It's the same with the criticism. Like, okay, like, oh, why do we have to take off our shoes? Like, oh, nobody else does that. Okay, let's think about it. Let's talk about it. Like, what is the purpose for this criticism? And maybe they figure it out with time that no, it's actually a very special thing, and maybe they don't. But either way, attending to that person and why
Yeah.
they're having that concern, I think matters more than whether or not they're allowed to have it.
Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. I agree.
All right, I'll let you have the last word here. We've had a nice conversation. We've probably taken longer than most people would ever watch, but our six faithful viewers are still with us.
Yeah.
So, what do you want to leave us here with, Andrew?
Oh, I mean, I have this opportunity to reach over four people. I would just like to say, um, yeah, I'd like to say, there's something it's a reflection of something that one of the characters says in the movie, which is like, I man, I love the church so much, and also I'm excited to see where it can go. I'm excited to see what we can do when we start to recognize some of like the cultural challenges that a lot of Coptic Americans face, and how we can best serve that, and really get at like the core of what the church is supposed to be about, which is bringing people closer to Jesus and following his teachings. And yeah, I think there's like sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating. I can sit after church and we'll talk about things like, oh, this isn't going so well. But it's an opportunity. We just have so much opportunity to do great things with our church. And so
Yeah,
I appreciate you talking with me, because I think that's a small step on the way there.
right. And it has nothing to do with I mustache you something, and it has nothing to do with Abuna, and it has nothing to do with Andrew, it has nothing to do with
Yeah,
Mina, and has everything to do with who we are as Coptic American Christians,
yeah,
and how we're constantly evolving together and how we're growing together and having those conversations and promoting that dialogue. And don't don't get locked into, well, this is what I feel like I have to be, or this is where I have
yeah,
to go, or this is what I'm allowed to do, this is what I'm not allowed to, what I'm allowed to
yeah,
think, what I'm not allowed to think, what I'm allowed to ask, not allowed to ask, what I'm allowed to criticize, what I'm, oh no, we don't ask. Like, guys, like, let's be open, and
yeah.
let's figure out who we are together.
Yeah, and I'm if I can just say where I'm gonna be so people can come. I'm gonna tell you a bunch of locations. One of these is not a real location I'm going to, but I want you to guess which one it is, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to Seattle,
Okay.
Orange County,
Okay.
Detroit,
Okay.
Cleveland,
Okay.
Coachella, Boston,
Hmm.
and then maybe New York or Toronto. We're still in the works.
Or New York and Toronto.
New York and Toronto. Which
Okay.
one of those is not a real? Which one of those am I not going to?
Obviously Cleveland. Like, who would go to
Yeah,
Cleveland?
right, right. Actually, I'm very excited to go to Cleveland. Mina, we met in Cleveland. We haven't seen each other in 14 years.
So I I love Cleveland,
Yeah.
like with my heart. I
Uh-huh.
think Some of my
That's when somebody says that, they're about to say they're about to
there's always a
rip,
but. There's
they're
always
to
a
rip Cleveland apart.
there's always a but. No, truly, like some of my favorite people in the whole world are in Cleveland, and that's where you stayed with us when
Yeah,
Out of Egypt came, and you stayed with us when we lived in Cleveland for 6 years. And I love those people so much, and they're always like, when are you going to come back to visit? I'm like, if there's a wedding and God forbid a funeral, let me know.
yeah,
Otherwise, let's just meet somewhere else. Like, just tell me where you want me to go,
yeah,
somewhere with a palm tree. But for
yeah.
me to book 5 tickets for a family of 5 and end up landing in Cleveland and going, yeah, oh, yeah, I remember, I remember this, I remember
Yeah.
this. No,
Hey, Mina's saying this. I think Cleveland's fantastic. I think Cleveland's better than any other city in the world.
okay. I listen.
I'm hearing the other viewpoint, and that's how I've always believed, and you'll never change my mind.
We'll talk again after you go again.
Have an argument with you. No, I'm excited to go to all these places because there's wonderful people. This is the greatest thing about it. I get to meet all these people around the country, and I really love getting to know them. It's been great.
Awesome. So thank you for bringing back I Mustache You Something. This was fun. And I hope I get to keep this for as long as I can.
About 24 hours.
Bye.